that song on just because of, yes, after lunch, yes, to get you moving a little bit, but it really was about this idea of if you have a theme song. I'm going to ask the two that are talking back there if you could have a seat and talk about your theme song later. Thank you. But this idea with Gen Z is really thinking about who they are, is the conversation I want to have with you today. So that song, Got to Be Real by Cheryl Lynn. Shafiq, when we were looking it up, he says to me, that's an old one. I was like, it is. So I picked that as my theme song when I was 10 years old, and I have never let it go. Other songs I love and I've brought on board along the way, but that is my theme song. And I think about it as a theme song for this conversation about Gen Z and about integrating them into our workforce. So we've got 30 minutes and we're going to do three things. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little perspective about Gen Z. The second thing I'm going to do is we're going to talk about these pain points for Gen Z as they're entering the workforce. Some have entered already and some are just about to enter the workforce. And then this third thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about 3 actions that He's working on it. Is that a little better? Good. And the third thing are these 3 actions that we can do today that you can take in thinking about Gen Z and their leadership. So how many of you know what Gen Z is? Cans? Good. So we're going to talk about Gen Z in that perspective, but first I want you to sort of put yourself, to think about yourself in this way. So I've got a couple slides here. I'm not going to slide you to death, but I do want you to think about some of these things. And people have said to me that some of it is just easier when it's a visual. And it's looking like my little advancer isn't working so well. Do I do it from here or there? I'm having all kinds of tech troubles today. Over this way? There we go. So really about this Gen Z and thinking about Gen Z is really about centering leadership. So their ROI, return on investment, is our return on investment. And the way I think about this is centering their leadership. So if you will keep that in mind as we go through this, that this is about all of us, it's about all of our return on investment, but with Gen Z, it's really about thinking about how we center their leadership. So before we start talking about that perspective of Gen Z, I want you to quickly think about your influences. And this is really important because the more that we can put ourselves in Gen Z's shoes, the better we are. So when I think about my influences, you see these words, that word cloud. I think about my mom, my Aunt Trudy. I talk about Avon, the original gig worker, community action, a speakeasy. Yes, my Aunt Trudy ran an illegal speakeasy of which I started working in when I was 8 years old. That's my origin story. But really what these 2 women, my mom and my Aunt Trudy, were really giving me, and I didn't understand it and didn't have words for it, not only were they teaching me entrepreneurship, but they were really talking about the values, the kind of values about how you're going to work. And this is really important when you think about your own influences. How many of you held a part-time job? I don't assume your ages, but you held a part-time job. Name some of those part-time jobs. Anybody?
Paper delivery, the Gap.
Paper delivery, the Gap. Anybody else? Dry cleaners, all kinds of things. I worked at the local bodega that Miss May owned. I worked there from the time I was 13 until I went off to college. Everybody has something if you're of a certain age. But how many of you realize that with Gen Z, that this is the first generation in 5 decades to come to the workforce with actually very little work experience? Very little work experience. How many of you have Gen Zers in your life? Yep, a couple of hands. I too have a Gen Zer in my life. But they come to this with very little work experience, and that again is important. So when you think about, again, those influence stories that I told you about mine, my mom was, making dinners. We sold on Saturday. She ran a hair salon out of our kitchen, cleaned it all up by 2 o'clock, turned it over, and then it was making dinners that we then sold. My mom sold Avon, and I had to help her package it and deliver it. Again, my Aunt Trudy had the speakeasy. We were always working, and I was always learning. I was learning customer service. I was learning the nuance of people and their personalities. I was learning about how you distribute your product. I was learning about how you purchase, the numbers. I was running the cash box in the speakeasy when I was 8 years old. Those are things that you just don't just dump on someone later and expect them to know. Those are important things, and it may not have seemed like much of anything back then, but they were important. So you think about your origin stories, and then again, think about as we talk about Gen Z. So when you think about who influenced you, I want you to also think about not only who influenced you, but I also want you to think about what they were teaching you, lessons that you, again, didn't even realize were so important. And I want you to keep that in mind as we talk a little bit more about Gen Z and their background and their influences. So when you think about this, the reason I put this visual is, again, people said to me, I hear you saying these numbers, but please, I need to see it. Think about this, that we've got Gen Z born between 1995 and 2012. So that means the oldest of Gen Z is about to be 30 years old. I have a goddaughter who's in graduate school, about to be 30 years old. I cannot believe it. That's the oldest of them. They entered the workforce beginning in about 2018, right? And then we've got those on the youngest who are born in roughly 2012. They're in 8th grade. They're about to head to high school. So from high school, almost high school, to about 30 years old is the range for current Gen Zers. So now you've got that in your head. Picture that, again, your nieces, your nephews, your neighbors, whomever. We've got just shy of 70 million Gen Zers. That's a lot of people, 70 million. In 2023 alone, just 2 years ago, 17 million Gen Zers entered the workforce. And by 2030, which is less than 5 years away, we're projected that we will have 30% of our workforce will be Gen Z. Think about that, let those numbers sink in. In less than 5 years, it'll be 2030, and 30% of our workforce will be made up of Gen Z. Now, also remember, we've got about 5 generations in the workforce, right? So you've got those folks who are very young and those who are very seasoned. I refuse to say old. They are very seasoned. But that's a lot of different personalities, interests, but also a lot of different ways that people have been taught and their influences that you've got mixed there in the workforce. And I want you to think about, again, so that 17 million that have entered the workforce since 2023, and you've got about, by 2030, you're gonna have about 30%. And then you think about that, again, Gen Z is the first generation to come to the workforce with very little work experience. Does not mean that they are not smart. This is the generation that is described as entrepreneurial. They are digital natives. They care about public issues. They are incredibly smart and talented and funny and all of these things, but don't come to the workforce, again, with a lot of that work experience. How do we do this? How do we write this? How do we engage? And because they are so smart that many times that it can get, this is where I then hear from managers, they think they know everything. They just want to jump right in. So I want you to keep that in mind again. I want you to look at this one. I'm sorry, this is moving a little bit. And this is really important. Again, one, people asked me to put in a visual because I just told you who they are, their personality traits. And now I want you to think about this, that we've got 60% of Gen Zers who they expect their managers to care about their well-being. I told you they care about issues, they care about people, they're having nuanced conversations. They want you to care about their well-being. Then you've got another 65% or so of Gen Zers who describe themselves as they are ready and willing to learn and jump in. And I can tell you, having a Gen Zer and working with many of them, I don't discount that. Love to learn, want to be involved. But then you've also got about 70% of Gen Zers who expect that they're going to get their first promotion within 18 months on the job. I don't know what you were doing. When I got my first job, I certainly wasn't getting a promotion within 18 months. And I can also tell you that my first boss, Liz, she did not care about my well-being. It was get that work done, get it done on time, and just do. It had nothing to do with how I was doing. So you've got about, again, 70% of them who are saying, I want to be promoted within 18 months. And then you've got about 74% of Gen Zers who say they would leave their job for a low salary, due to a low salary. So all these things feel like, wait, I thought you cared about this, I thought this, but you're telling me this. It can feel, as managers tell me, so back to this idea of pain points. I told you we would do 3 things. One is give you some perspective about Gen Z. 2, we talk about those pain points for Gen Z and for their managers. And the managers who are hiring them and then have to supervise them, these are the things that drive them crazy. When we do the research, when we're there and asking to be of support to their teams, they're saying, I can't work with them. How do you think you get here and then you're just going to jump right in and have a promotion in 18 months? How are you telling me that you don't want to work for this salary? So we've got those things going on. But then you've also got Gen Z saying, but I want to jump in and I want to learn. And then you've got about 75% of Gen Zers, again, who tell you that they care about the social impact. So they are researching their potential employers. They're looking to see, do you care about your team members? They're looking on Glassdoor to see what your ratings are. They're looking to see that, do you care about animals, who you support politically, do you care about diversity, equity, inclusion? And there, where many are having the conversations that are so politicized about DEI now, they're saying, look, this is not about tolerating, we expect this. This world is incredibly diverse, and it's not about just race. This is about class, where people come from geographically. It's about sexual orientation, religion, what people care about. This is not this one-dimensional conversation. They're not interested in having that. And then you've got about 92% of Gen Zers who've graduated. And when I say graduate, we're not just talking about from 4-year college. It could be 2-year college, it could be technical school, but 92% of them who say that they would like to discuss mental health at work. This is the first generation that was willing to put that front and center and not pretend that everything was okay. And have really opened the door in some very positive ways for everyone. But now many of our employers are starting to think about well-being at work, how you use your employee benefits for more than just your health insurance or an occasional professional development. So again, these are some of the things that people have asked me about. These Gen Z concerns, I've mentioned some of them. This loss of commitment to DEI, climate change, mental health, economic concerns, AI will eliminate their jobs. I've actually had managers who are older say, wait, they're worried about AI like I'm worried about it? Yes. Many of them are worried about AI. They are excited about it, they're using it, but they also are worried about what does it mean for them, and as they're trying to settle into the workforce. They're trying to pick jobs, when will those jobs be gone? So what does that mean for them? When we ask those managers again about their pain points, they talk about managing Gen Z, and they say, you know, I've got 40% of leaders claim that Gen Z is not prepared for work. And this is not just a claim. There's research that has been done that show that the chasm between what students know coming into the workforce, coming out of college, and what employers wish they knew. But I want to remind you, this is not just about what Gen Z and they're not willing to do. This is about what we've actually been willing to teach them. It's really hard to tell a Gen Zer, I want you, when they're in middle school and high school, I want you to learn how to play multiple sports, and I want you to speak multiple languages, and I want you to do this and this, and I want you to apply to 20 colleges, and then to say to them, oh, and I want you to also have all of this incredible work experience and know how to be in the workforce. We have to take some responsibility for that. I am a parent of a Gen Zer. We've wanted the best for them, whether they were our neighbor, our own children, our nieces, our nephews. We have wanted the best for them, and one of the things that we've taken off the table is the way in which they get work and get integrated into work, because they're trying to do all of these other activities. Managers also report to us, they say about 42% of managers say that, you know, they claim that Gen Z employees introduced a more casual workplace environment. I've worked with many a manager over the last few years. This really gets under their skin. They want it to look professional. They want people to still come to the office. And some of this is about COVID, and some of this is about they're saying there are ways in which Gen Z works that they would prefer they did not, and they've brought this culture into the workplace. But I've also had other managers who say, I think it's great. I don't care what they wear as long as they come and they get the work done. But we've got these competing things that people are concerned about. So again, you've got those who are saying, this is something that I'm worried about. And then you've got a percentage of managers who think Gen Z lacks a work ethic and communication skills. That's a huge number, about 70%. So again, a generation that is very technologically advanced, and they're used to being on their machines, and this is what they're used to doing, and doing it in a few short words. You know, you may have seen the reports about how many kids nowadays don't actually know how to write cursive. Many of them actually don't. There was a report in the Atlantic magazine recently about how many of them don't know how to read long form, any kind of journalism, any kind of book. They're used to doing it very short order. They're used to going on the computer. I mean, again, it used to be you had to go get Cliff Notes. They don't have to do that. They can just get a summary, again, through AI. So I'm not about making any of these about bad or good, just saying they're different. And when you've got 5 generations in the workforce, it can feel tough navigating all of this. And then you've got that percentage of managers who do not understand what Gen Z needs in the workforce. About 75% of them report to us, I want to actually welcome Gen Z into the workforce. I want them to be the best leaders possible. I'm really not sure what to do for them. I'm not sure what to give them. And then lastly, you've got that another about 75% of managers who find it challenging to meet Gen Z's needs and their workplace expectations. So these are these managers who are saying, look, I'm trying, but I can't give you more salary. I can't give you more days off. I don't know what else to do. I need you to actually be here, and I need you to be working. So you've got pain points from Gen Z saying, hey, I want to be in places that care for me. I want to be in places that are teaching me. I'm ready to jump in. I want some experience. I want understanding. And you've got those who've hired them and now have to manage them saying, but you can't do this in 18 months. You can't expect everything, and I need you to slow your roll a little bit. And so we're constantly being called in trying to help them figure out how to find a middle ground and what that middle ground looks like so that it advances everyone. And the way in which I do this is really talking to them about how do we center leadership. And that's been a way in which it has helped both those, again, who are hiring and managing Gen Z and Gen Z, because we need them to actually be leaders. We need them ready to go because our world is getting only more complex. And so we are trying to figure out the ways in which we do this. So we're thinking a lot about what this looks like, and it can't be the same as it always has been. There are literally things we are doing in the workforce different than we did even 2 years ago in the ways in which we're coming in and we're asked to come in. There are things that have changed dramatically, of course, because of COVID, but there are other things that have nothing to do with COVID. It is literally that things keep changing for Gen Z that fast. I don't know if you talk to your Gen Zers who are about 23, 24. My daughter's 23, and there are things I ask her and she'll say to me, you don't need me, you need to go get you a younger Gen Z. Can you imagine a 23-year-old saying, you need to go get you somebody younger? She says, no, you need a teenager for that. I'm old at 23. You need a younger teenager for that. But that's how fast things are changing for them and also in our workforce. So we're trying to figure out how do we take the other four, those in the generation, the other 4 generations in the workforce, how do we take the things that they know and they do, and how do we blend it with what Gen Z is trying to do and what they need? And we're also trying to figure out how to do this for those who are in offices that have remained remote. At most, most of our clients are only back to work 2-3 days a week at most, and some only come together as a team once a quarter. And so we're trying to figure out how to do this. So I said we were going to do 3 things. 1, we were going to put a little perspective around Gen Z. And 2 was going to help you think about some of those pain points for both Gen Z and for those who are hiring them and managing them. And so what you see is that they both have legitimate arguments here about how they're doing, how they're feeling, what their concerns are. You've got Gen Z trying to do the best job they can. They're trying to jump in. They're trying to understand. They're scared about, am I going to be useful? Are there going to be ways in which I can contribute? And sometimes what I have found in those Gen Zers, when they're all over the place and it feels like to those who've hired them and are managing them that they think they're entitled or they know everything, what you really have is a Gen Zer who's really afraid. You have a Gen Zer who is really not sure how to blend in because, again, if I don't have those experiences, and then even the internships I got in college were remote because of COVID, and now I'm working in a place that's overwhelmingly remote, it is very difficult to figure out how to make your place in space, and so you can end up feeling like you're just all over the place, and what that can translate to that person who's been in the workforce for a long time is that you come off as that you're entitled, you know everything, and that you're demanding, when it really is not always that. So when I go back to that idea of these influences, I ask you to think about your influences. I ask you to put yourself in Gen Z's shoes and to be a bit empathetic. Now, I am not saying let them run over you. I'm not saying give them everything. And I know that those who feel that they are presenting themselves as entitled, you will know how to manage that. But I really do encourage you to think about this empathy. When we find that we are helping leaders figure out how to be their most empathetic, we find that teams are growing faster. So now I wanted to give you some of those things to think about in terms of tools you might use. And here are some of the tools that we're using. So I said to you, you'd have as number 3, you'd have 3 actions at least. One of those actions is rethinking professional development. Completely rethinking professional development. And when I say completely rethinking professional development, how many of you in this room got executive coaching along the way in your career? Anybody? What was the average age when you said you think you got that executive coaching? Average age? 40. Somebody else? Average age when you got executive coaching? 33, 35. Say it again? 25, you were good. 40 is about the average age. That's a long time to wait. And it used to be that professional development and executive coaching was seen as a gift, as something as a reward for having put your time in and you've been there and you've been doing the work. And what we've been really working through with those that we go into corporate, government, nonprofits, as well as philanthropic, and we've been helping them to think about how you flip that on its head and actually to provide executive coaching and professional development at the very beginning. And what we've also done is completely change their onboarding programs so that the onboarding is being, what we have found with Gen Z is you have to be super duper clear in that job description. If you really stopped and you really thought about how many ways that you as an employer, as a team member, as a director, a manager, there are so many ways we have found that people, particularly 40 and over, I'm there, it is not a knock on us, but there's so many things that we assume that people will know. That because we learned it, we did it, we assume that others know it and they know how to do it. And that cannot be the case with Gen Z. So being super clear in the job description and really rethinking the onboarding experience to ensure that it's an onboarding experience that is much more comprehensive. This isn't about hand-holding or coddling someone, just being super clear about it has worked wonders. That professional development experience, it can't just be a conference here or there anymore. Conferences are important. We're here at an amazing conference. They're important. But we actually would encourage you to think about some of the things that you could do that are closer to home. And we have found that with Gen Z, how many minutes do you think that Gen Z, most people will laugh at this, they can actually keep attention on something? Think about it. How many hours, minutes do you think that they can actually keep attention on something? 5 seconds.
20 minutes.
20 minutes. 5 minutes. The time is 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And this is not just Gen Z. I'm naming them, but this is not just Gen Z. For all of us, our attention span has dropped dramatically because of technology. It's so many things coming at us so fast, and we're trying to translate a lot of information. 10 minutes. So really creating some mini courses that are about 10 minutes long have been really important for Gen Z to take in good information, to learn, but to have to do it in shorter span because they cannot keep the attention span. And not just them, but many of us. So think about that. What would it look like to create modules as part of the professional development, easy access, or even quick opportunities for a webinar, or the things you're doing internally with the group? But it cannot be long, it cannot be hours long. I also want to ask you, when you think about communication, how many times do you think people have to hear something now before it sinks in? How many times? 5, 7, 3, 21, 10. Close. 21 is what you said? 20. 20 times. And again, this isn't just Gen Z, this is us, all of us. It takes about 20 times for you to hear it, see it, before it sinks in. You might get pieces of it, but for it to sink in. So you think about all of these competing forces and thinking about how you might need to rethink your professional development. And when you think about onboarding differently and you think about professional development, it is incredible. Lastly, what I'll say under that professional development, what we've also helped Gen Z do and their managers is we help them to learn how they work best, because what we realized is there were competing ways in which they were working and they felt like one was better than the other and they actually could meld and be helpful to each other. So we use things like the DISC, and you can use all kinds of things, but really helping people to understand how they operate under stress is really telling. And what we found, and if some managers were really angry about it at first, I had one that I worked with and she said, I don't get this, because Gen Z works collaboratively. They really like working together in teams. They like figuring it out. And this manager said, I just had to figure these things out on my own. Why wouldn't they? I don't want them working together. It's like, who cares? As long as it gets done, right? As long as it gets done. But again, having to rethink what onboarding looks like, professional development looks like, and the way in which you build teams and the tools you use to invest in those teams may not necessarily be time consuming, may not necessarily be expensive, but they do wonders for building leadership, centering leadership. Because I go back to the idea here is not just Gen Z's return on investment, our return on investment, and centering leadership. Gen Z wants to be a contributor. They want to do well, and how we help them, how we advance them, and how we give them the best tools possible makes it so that it can happen. And again, I remind you, because we need them. This isn't about that this is a luxury or an extra. We need Gen Z to be able to comprehend complex issues. So we have to figure out the ways around. It takes 20 times to communicate, or people can only have the attention span of about 10 minutes, and have to figure out these ways to do more earlier than waiting for it to be later, to somehow it's a perk because you've built your way through, or you've crawled your way through. So 30 minutes, 3 things. One was perspective on Gen Z. You now know who they are, that you have 70 million of them. 17 million entered the workforce in 2023. By 2030, less than 5 years away, 30% of them will be our workforce. You know who they are in terms of their personality. They're entrepreneurial, they're digital natives. They want to jump in, they want to help. But you also know what they're afraid of. They're afraid of AI taking over their jobs. They're afraid of climate change. They're afraid of DEI being politicized. They're just as afraid as any other person, any other age. You also know the pain points for them. They want to do well, but they seem that they come off as entitled. They want to talk about mental health. They want to have well-being, but they want to be paid well. And you know those pain points for their managers as well. Those same things flipped for the manager. And lastly, you have ways in which you can think about investing in Gen Z to make them the leaders, the global leaders that we need, and so that they can do the work that we know that we will need them to do, not only with us, but also for us. The ways in which we need to be integrating them and centering their leadership. So I encourage you to think about Gen Z as this incredible part of our workforce. They are not, as we said about DEI, where they are not tolerating it, they want it. The same is about Gen Z. I don't think about tolerating them. I think about they're amazing, they're interesting. There are things that they know that we just don't know, those of us who might be older, ways in which they're forced to move faster. The things that they are bringing to the table are so interesting, and it really has to be an integrated effort. So I thank you for the interest in Gen Z and the return on investment in Gen Z, because again, the return on investment for Gen Z is the return on for all of us. So thank you.